And we're live.
Okay, I'll call to order the Wednesday, February 1st, 2023 meeting of the Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Doug Neely.
Here.
Roll call. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
Here.
Vice Chair Sean Cross.
Here.
And Chair Mike Mitchell.
Here. Okay, next up is citizen comments. We do have one citizen comment, Mr. Paul Edgar.
Thank you. Paul Edgar, Oregon City. First, we have an opportunity that's going to be in front of us about coming up with emergency or shelter housing for Oregon City in this area. It's an opportunity that I think we all hear that the governor is pushing it. There's Metro housing funds available. But the real purpose is we need to save lives. We need to have a place where we can take people that are in crisis, that need intervention, either to save themselves or to prevent injuries to someone else. And right now we don't have that. That handicaps us. And it handicaps our police in just being smart. So the reason why coming before the Urban Renewal Commission to talk about this is that there are lands potentially in the Cove area or someplace that could be urban renewal lands that could be repurposed for a higher and better use in saving lives. And maybe this is a time to consider something like that as there's going to be more and more discussion about this in this legislature that's just happening right now. We can be reactive or proactive. I would rather think that we should be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve. And that's the reason why I'm coming before you today, is saying, can we think about this? Can we say that there are potentially some lands that could be used for a higher and better purpose to save lives? And if you think that that's an opportunity, I would surely like for you to consider something, because NIMBY is real. There's a lot of places that maybe could be considered, but I'll tell you what, a lot of the neighbors would be not very happy for some of the places that might be considered. But shelters and being proactive for individuals that are struggling to keep their head above the water really works. I've been on the Veterans Advisory Council for Clackamas County, and we put together a veteran village out in Clackamas off of Evelyn Street. The success rate of being able to intercept veterans and bringing them in and having a little bit of counseling has been enormous. It's almost 90% of the people never get back on the street. That's kind of like a wow over what we're doing and putting just Band-Aids or kicking the can down the road. I just would love to appeal to you guys, let's end kicking cans down the road. We have property. Let's use some of the property for a higher and better purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgar. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on items not on the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, is there anyone online? No? Okay. We will move on to the next item on the agenda. Item number 1, Urban Renewal Agency ballot measure and explanatory statement to approve borrowing of funds to implement urban renewal projects. Mr. Conkle, is that you?
Yes, thank you. So before you tonight, we have the urban renewal Ballot measure proposal to authorize the borrowing of up to $44 million for projects to be implemented that have been identified in the urban renewal plan. We did receive a letter tonight. We've placed that on the dais for you from Mr. Buss, representing Mr. Williams and his wife, with raising issues with the ballot measure, the caption, question summary. Be happy to assist discussing or answering questions associated with what's been raised. Mr. Geisman can help with that discussion as well. Or if there are other questions about the language that's been proposed, we can help answer those as well.
So I'm thinking we might want to hear from Mr. Geisman before we discuss. Does that make
I
sense?
just wanted to have him give, he just got it himself, so
Right.
if he can give us a summary, that would be great.
I guess,
We're not gonna be able to
Okay.
read it.
Mr. Geisman, go ahead.
thank you, Chair Smith. I guess I can go through the letter and give you my perspective on the issues that are raised here, but I think I also don't want to miss the opportunity that you guys have been thinking about it. You may have your own thoughts, and if there are any concerns about it, let's deal with yours, and then we can go into the letter if that makes sense, or we can flip it. Really, it's at your call.
Any preference from the commissioners? Commissioner Neely?
Have you read on it?
Yeah, this.
I was just going to say, the issue about the wordings and so forth, I'm not sure that this reflects what I think the wording is, but do you have any issues?
Yeah, I don't have any necessary issues with what's in the language. You know, we can always improve, and if there is something that's better, let's do it, you know, but I'll walk through some of the issues that are raised in the letter. For example, the first issue, if you look at the top of the second page, it's talking about the caption, which is supposed to identify the subject matter of the measure and the actual major effects. And the primary complaint that they have is that the proposed caption merely identifies that the measure relates to borrowing without identifying the actual effect, which is to approve new bonded indebtedness. Here's what the caption says. Where is the caption? I know I've got it right here. Caption, borrowing for Oregon City Urban Renewal Agency. And he says, you know, we should change that essentially to say, approve new bonded indebtedness for Oregon City Urban Renewal Agency. It's essentially swapping borrowing for bonded indebtedness. Besides being difficult to say, bonded indebtedness isn't as easily understood in my mind as borrowing. When you talk to somebody and say, we're going to issue bonded indebtedness, the response is, what's that? And you say, well, we're going to borrow a bunch of money from the bank and pay it back. And so, to me, in terms of being a, you know, reasonably identifies and describes the actual major effect, borrowing to me sounds better than bonded indebtedness. I will acknowledge that the charter actually says bonded indebtedness and not borrowing, but to the average person, I think borrowing is a better term and more understandable. And that's, I think, what the commission would like to do is send out something that's understandable.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I actually thought the letter was thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the points of contention. When I read it, you know, the bonded indebtedness piece is a firm ground. And you know, one of the points of contention have always been what constitutes debt. The difference between bonded indebtedness and debt that we use to satisfy operational details. So I found the letter interesting in that these are potential litigants, very high potential litigants, that are telling us in advance, these are the things that we're going to challenge you on, and you may be able to amend those to possibly avoid it. However, if if you move toward the bonded indebtedness statement, you're basically reinforcing their position about what is debt. Only bonded indebtedness is allowed. So that's a decision for this group to make. I thought that the discussion about is the summaries that we put forward, are they impartial? And there's such a fine line between informational and impartiality, informational, or trying to sway the voter. So I think that's a pretty subjective criteria, but those are my observations on it. I did think it was a thoughtful letter, and if it gives us the opportunity to improve the offering, I'm not above considering it. But in the end, we have our own legal team, and that's what we'll defer to. So I'll leave my comments at that. I thought it was very thoughtful, though. Thank you.
Mr. Kvisman, you want to move on to the next section of his?
Sure. The next one talks about, the question, which is to reasonably identify the subject of the measure. And the question is, as written, is, shall the Urban Renewal Agency be approved to borrow up to $44 million for projects in the urban renewal area? And the letter says, doesn't identify the chief purpose of the measure. Again, brings up the idea of bonded indebtedness instead of borrowing. And also makes no mention of interest charges that'd be associated with bonded indebtedness. So, the two issues are borrowing versus bonded indebtedness, getting back to the question Commissioner O'Donnell raised, and then, in the question of whether interest should be included in the question. And my initial impression is that interest is sort of part of any bonded indebtedness or borrowing. You just don't borrow without interest. I'm not certain the fact that there's interest adds that much to the question.
Any thoughts from commissioners? Well, why don't you go on ahead then and discuss their comments on the summary.
Okay. So the summary is concise and partial statement of not more than 175 words, summarizing the measure and its major effect. I'm not going to read the entire summary. You have that in front of you in your packet. Instead, kind of go through some of the issues. Let's see. All significant Oh, I've got the wrong page, sorry. The first issue is that the first line says not what the issue does, but what it does not do, impose a new tax. And I had a conversation with our bond counsel before coming here about the issues that are raised in this. Her point is that in most cases, when voters are asked to approve bonds or borrowing by a jurisdiction, that tends to be general obligation bonds. And the result of those general obligation bonds is an increase in tax. So in the context when a voter is being asked to approve new borrowing, the assumption, I think in the context of Oregon ballot measures, the assumption is this is going to be a new tax. So while the letter is correct that it is what it does not do, because of that context, it's an important part of the impact of the measure. So, I think in context that first sentence makes sense. I think one of the other things, Tony actually looked up our previous measure, which I think was a water measure, and the same language was used in that. It was used later, further down. It wasn't the first sentence, but that measure also went through without any challenge. So there's that. The second issue is...
Mike, before he goes on. Bill, before you go on, how does this constitute, according to this letter, a tax, an additional tax? I mean, it's not an additional tax. I don't see that it's a tax.
Yeah, I don't think the letter would say that it's wrong in that it does create a tax. I think what the letter is saying is it's irrelevant. It's not one of the effects, because what you're saying is what it doesn't do. And the summary is to summarize a measure and its major effect, and to say, well, not creating a tax, that's not a major effect. And I think the response to that is you've got to understand the context in which voters see ballot measures authorizing borrowing, and the general assumption is that in fact they do end up in a tax. So the criticism isn't that that language is incorrect. The criticism is that that language is irrelevant. It doesn't, it isn't one of the major effects. And so the question for the commission is, given that context, does it make sense that that is in fact a major effect that a voter would be interested in? The second criticism is the entire second paragraph is improper advocacy that does not describe the actual major effect of the measure and doesn't provide anything further than saying that. And I think when this was crafted, the language is basically taken directly from the urban renewal plan about if the funds were borrowed, what would happen. And so if in fact they say yes, the voters were to say yes, that is what's going to happen. That is the intent of the borrowing, is to have those projects completed. So I without some more detail, I'm not certain what else is the issue there. The third is that Section 59 of the Charter does not allow the pre-approval of refinancing at the time of initial bond indebtedness. That approval, if it ever comes, must come separately at a later election. So the idea of pre-approval of refinancing, and I'm trying to find that language in the measure, the borrowings may be issued in one or more series, each maturing within 20 years of issuance, and the agency may refinance the borrowings. That language was actually added at the request of bond counsel with the idea that if this voters approve this, the urban renewal agency goes out and borrows money, and at the time they could get it at 5% interest, and a couple years later the market changes and they could get the same bonds at 3% interest. Why wouldn't you do that? And so that was to allow the refinancing in that situation. And so from a voter's perspective, the question is, are we going to borrow? And it doesn't, there's no reason they can't allow refinancing as well, because it's just a matter of changing the terms of the money that you already have in your pocket. That's the idea behind the refinancing language. And I don't see anything in Section 59 that prevents getting pre-approval of refinancing.
I wasn't aware that you could get pre-approval on bonds. I mean, you either get the bond or you don't get the bond.
And that kind of gets exactly to the final criticism, which is finally, the summary says nothing about the financing terms of the bond indebtedness, such as interest rate, and Section 59 was not intended to allow a vote giving the URA a blank check. The difficulty with that is that voter approval for borrowings is necessarily a long process. We are debating this in January and February with the idea that it's going to be on the ballot in May. Should it be approved by the voters, the borrowing probably isn't likely to happen till July or August. And I'd look at Matt in the back, he's nodding his head that, we don't know what the terms are going to be in the market when it comes out in August. And the idea is that when the urban renewal agency goes to borrow, it's going to get the best terms that are available to it. And so there just isn't a way to set the terms of the financing in February for borrowing that's going to happen in August.
Anything else?
We can move on to the explanatory statement, if you want. So the explanatory statement is to be an impartial, simple, and understandable statement explaining the measure and effects. Says it's full of advocacy, describes what the measure does not do rather than what it does, and accurately describes the measure effects. And this is the only point that really struck me as possible, that there's The Oregon City Charter, what the current explanatory statement says is the Oregon City Charter requires that prior to the urban renewal agency to take on any debt, it must first be approved by the voters of Oregon City. There's a whole question about the effectiveness of Measure 59, but to the extent it's effective, this gets back to the question that, yeah, it doesn't prevent de jure borrowing and other types of borrowings. It requires voter approval for bonded indebtedness. And so if there is any change to be made, it might be that one to the Oregon City Charter requires that prior to the urban renewal agency to take on bonded indebtedness, it must first be approved by the voters of Oregon City. Finally, the letter talks about the plan area and repayment are confusing and misleading. At one point, the explanatory statement says the $44 million would be repaid by tax increment revenues collected within the plan area. Then appears to define plan area is approximately 55 acres. However, taxpayers throughout Oregon City pay for urban renewal, not just those who own the property within the plan area. I'm not quite certain what the letter is attempting to say there. I have some guesses, but the language in the explanatory statement is accurate, that the $44 million will be paid by tax increment revenue collected within the plan area, the 855 acres. That's the only place where there's, the frozen basis and tax increment financing comes from. If I had to guess, I think what the letter writer is trying to say is that when that tax increment gets financed, other jurisdictions don't get their full amount, and so the other voters end up having to pay more for other services. And I'm not certain I'm articulating that particularly well, but that's, the complaint. One of the complaints that you hear about urban renewal is that it takes funds away from other agencies, and I suspect that's what they're trying to say, but I don't know it for certain. What I can tell you is the quoted language is accurate.
Okay, commissioners, what comments do you have? Commissioner McGriff.
Well, aside from us just getting this evening and not, apparently Commissioner O'Donnell's the only one that's digested it. I'm going to have to sit and read this carefully, and not in the last 5 minutes. So I would presume that we're going to issue some sort of a response, or we're not, or what's your recommendation?
Well, we're moving up against the deadline for submittal of the measure. I believe that is February. I'm looking at the city recorder to confirm
I believe
that.
it's the 24th.
So, it's February 1st. So there is the potential for another Urban Renewal Commission meeting at the same time. I'm not certain if it, well, let me back up two things. One, we want to get it right, and if I'm relatively comfortable with most of it being okay. As Commissioner O'Donnell alluded to, this particular letter writer has litigated the language of a ballot title with the city twice in the past, and so it's not inconceivable that they would do that. And we want to make sure there's enough time for that process to happen. Moreover, even if we were to make every change that is suggested, I'm not certain that would prevent that litigation from occurring as well. So it's really a matter of trying to figure out the best way to get this moving in a way that the Urban Renewal Commission wants to. We could certainly delay it and adopt it at the meeting on the 15th. I give that one to, yeah. But that would be 9 days to run through any challenge. The alternative would be to adopt it tonight, and then any challenge would have an additional 14 days to work through the process. So my thought would be that it's really up to the commission if what you were able to glean in the hour or 2 hours that you've had it leaves you any significant concern, let's delay it. If you think that what you've read and what I've kind of talked through, the letter writer isn't here to sort of provide an alternative, and I'm not certain. I think they do a pretty good job of laying out their case in the letter. Then I think you can move forward, and if they still have concerns, they've shown they know perfectly well how to get to the courthouse.
And I wanted to add one thing for clarity. The February 24 deadline is for the final language, but the deadline to submit to the county is March 16. So there is a little bit more room.
I'm sorry, the deadline to submit what is March 16th?
The deadline for the city recorder or the elections official is to submit to the county is March 16th. But the deadline for the final language to be submitted to me is February 24.
Okay, I see.
Thanks.
Commissioner O'Donnell. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Cross.
No, I'm comfortable with what it says, about what we have here. I would suggest that we actually approve this tonight.
Other thoughts? Commissioner O'Donnell.
So, Mr. Kabizman, if we entered into a conversation with these potential litigants, I mean, the resolution of that also depends on getting a court date, does it not?
It does, and in the past, the other times we've litigated ballot titles, the court has been fairly accommodating of the expedited schedule and getting in front of a judge pretty quickly.
Well, when I read the thing, I see a number of recurring issues, bonded indebtedness versus indebtedness. It's interesting when they refer to Measure 59, they kind of there's a difference between servicing a loan and paying for operational expenses, which has been an issue in the past. It hasn't come up.
No.
Sorry, thanks. I think we should always try to improve this to the greatest degree we can and still meet the deadline. Servicing the debt, I mean, they're talking about, the argument is that citywide, all citizens paid for urban renewal. And we're saying servicing the debt will come from the TIF generated. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you could potentially isolate those two and say the service of this debt will be from TIF funds generated. So I'm not exactly sure where to go with this. I had my own thoughts on the thing, but I'm going to have to defer to others to just try to reach a resolution. The simple thing to do is, as Mr. Cross says, put it on there and see what happens. Part of me says if you can remove those constraints and avoid litigation and still have the full force of what we intend to do, that may not be a bad approach either, knowing there's a deadline on the horizon.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, I'd like to suggest that we approve it this evening, but also give our attorney and our city manager the latitude, if they can fine-tune it, to make it clear. I'm not looking at trying to appease anyone, but if it could provide more clarity, I would like to give them the opportunity to be able to do that. And then if it needs to come back, it needs to come back. So that would be my suggestion.
Commissioner Neely?
I'm not sure we'll ever avoid litigation.
Commissioner Morrow?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Commissioner Neely. I'm not sure any word changes we would make tonight would avoid litigation down the line. I would prefer to just move it forward tonight, and I appreciate the letter, and when I suggested that we move up the information that it does not result in additional taxes, I was wondering if that was going to be pointed out as something that could be construed as trying to advocate. But I mean, just pulling from my experience in the legislature, when you go online to look at a bill, it'll say from the Legislative Revenue Office and from the Legislative Fiscal Office, this measure does not result in a fiscal impact, in a revenue impact. And I think that's something that's something that our voters deserve to know. So I'm fine with moving forward tonight.
As am I. Is there a motion?
I guess I'll move that we approve the ballot title as submitted in Resolution 2303.
Second.
And For clarification, you're talking about the title, the explanatory statement, there's 4 different pieces, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
So
thank
you're
you.
talking about moving forward with all 4?
yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Doug Neely,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
I need to think about it for a moment.
This is on,
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
yes.
Abstain.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sean Cross,
Yes.
Chair Mike Mitchell,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Abstain.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Move on to item number 2, professional service contract with Piper Sandler and Company relating to the pursuit of borrowing funds for urban renewal projects. Is that Mr. Graham or Mr. Conkle?
Thank you. So before you, we have a personal service contract with Piper Sandler and Company relating to the pursuit of borrowing funds for urban renewal projects. Staff does recommend approval of one professional service contract. As a standard with most public borrowing, the financing team for the Urban Renewal Agency includes staff, underwriter or placement agent, and bond attorney. Each vendor holds a unique role. Finance staff provides financial information for both past operations, current budget, and future forecasts. Underwriters or placement agents bridge the gap between the Urban Renewal Agency and the financial markets, which would include any source of borrowing, including debt structuring, market conditions, and credit ratings. Bond attorneys assist the city in all legal matters related to the public borrowing, which is highly regulated practice of law, more specific than services offered by general counsel. The financing team is necessary regardless of the source of borrowing, open market, loan, etc. Finance staff has selected Piper Sandler as financial consultant. They've represented the City of Oregon City for several decades, most recently with the Oregon City Library Expansion Project and the Robert Lipke Public Safety Building Project. Carol Samuels will serve as managing partner. So we are recommending approval of this. This would be, if the vote is approved, we would rely on this contract to help with the placement and obtaining of the debt.
But no money changes hands until we issue a bond, and then it's a percentage of the bond amount.
Correct.
Okay, so there's no financial impact at this point.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from commissioners or comments?
Just a clarification.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, so I appreciated that you referred back to our team that we will have for this. So obviously I understand who the staff role is. So are these folks the underwriters, or are they the bond attorneys?
This is the, for the underwriting.
Okay, so that, yeah, I would have just clarified that you say underwriting or placement agents. I would have just said that Piper Sandler and Company are going to be the underwriters, just say it. I assumed that's what they were, but I wrote myself a note to ask the question.
Mr. Zook, looks like you want to comment on that.
The reason it says, Matt Zook, Finance Director, the reason it says both underwriter and placement agent is the placement, Piper Sandler can do either one. A placement agent is when you go and do a borrowing from a bank. An underwriter is when you go to the open bond market. So that's two distinct roles depending on which route they take. So that's why it said both those roles. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, there was no problem with the contract. It was just clarifying they can do either or, so that's
Correct.
not a problem.
Right.
I just would have said Piper Sandler will be the underwriters or placement agents helping to bridge a gap, blah, blah, blah. So,
Commissioner O'Donnell?
So in plain language, their role is to optimize the search and find the most advantageous financial vehicle should this be approved. Okay.
Yes.
Anything else from any of the commissioners? We have a motion?
I move to approve the professional service contract with Piper Sandler and Company relating to the pursuit of borrowing funds for the urban renewal projects.
I second.
Call a vote, please.
Commissioner Doug Neely. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sean Cross.
Yes.
Chair Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item number 3, Urban Renewal Commission discussion of urban renewal agency-owned properties and considering potential projects. Mr. Conkle.
Thank you. So this item was requested by the Urban Renewal Commission, and it's really a discussion of, I think, kind of multiple discussions and ideas that have come up as we've worked to create the 11th Amendment to the Urban Renewal Plan, and specifically, how do we move forward with projects or properties that are owned by the agency? There have been discussions about, and as you may recall, in adopting the Urban Renewal Plan, we included in this a process to essentially evaluate proposals when they come in. That includes looking at zoning, what the proposal is, looking at the financials, the due diligence component. And some of the discussion has been, do we have a more formal process? Do we have a request for proposals, a request for information? How much time do we put into identifying what the commission wants to see on a property that they own? Do they want a mixed-use development? Do they want an office development? Do they want certain design standards? Do they want a certain density associated with it? So those ideas have come out through this process, and so I think, if my understanding is correct, this is really a discussion about how do we move forward with trying to get interest in development on some of these projects, especially the ones that we've identified that are owned by the agency itself. The Stimson property on Washington, 12th and Main are two that we've had quite a bit of discussion about, the Cove project. So I think that's what the intent is of this discussion, but I think we're here as staff to assist with that discussion, but I guess my understanding was that this was really going to be a discussion amongst the commissioners with us trying to help facilitate that discussion.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I view the question in a somewhat simpler form. They always say that you know what you know what you don't know, and the third category is you don't know what you don't know. And I know we've always said about we want a plan in place before we move forward. But what if someone were to come forward with a proposal that no one had envisioned, but having seen it, we think that's a heck of a good idea. We should consider it. And I thought that's what the discussion was tonight about. We were revisiting the previous direction about, do we entertain proposals that are unsolicited and see if they have value to us? And if I misunderstood the question, that's just how I viewed it.
Yeah, I asked Mr. Conkle to put this on here. I think I started the idea. And that was basically my question. From watching from out there, as the Urban Renewal Plan was developed, one of the things that was said multiple times was, we don't want to solicit or discuss unsolicited offers until we have an approved plan. Well, now we do. So does that mean we're ready to solicit those offers? And I guess I'm kind of reminded of the way that what planning does in our planning commission is sometimes described as, that is, we're setting the table. And we've set the table with the urban renewal plan. Exactly what gets built isn't, it is going to come from private development, not from what we decide. So basically the question that I was hoping we could get to is, are we ready to entertain and allow staff to entertain unsolicited offers? Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, well, you've all heard what I have said about this time and time again. I'm going to be try to be clear this time, not that you have to agree with me, but I am not interested in receiving random proposals. I want us to set a framework, a little more specificity than the urban renewal plan. So if we have something in mind that we would like to see for 12th and Main, I'm not saying we're excluding everything else, then let's say what that is. For instance, 12th and Main, we'd like to see a mixed-use development with retail that, activates the street, something to, I'm not saying that's specific, but I'm just going from my notes. I don't want people to waste their time coming in with what I would call WAG proposals that we tell them, well, we'll know it when we see it. Let's be more specific. Let's provide a little more framework and detail so staff can say, let me just say it. So, do we want a mattress store downtown? We said, no, we don't think we need a mattress store to activate a space. It was a nice proposal. We appreciated getting it, but it was not really what we were looking for. Then the question I got was, well, what is it that we are looking for? And I said, well, we need to do the plan. We need to talk about the properties that we want to focus on. So again, the Cove, let's just use that as an example. I think we already have a decent plan in place. It needs to be refined maybe a little more. But someone could come in and say, yes, I've looked at that plan. I think I can do the general framework, and here's more specificity about what I think we could do with the Cove, the park, and other things that we had thought we were going to get in that project. And I think we still want those particular elements. So we should tell somebody that we want that as part of their development proposal rather than just having these sort of random things that just come out of the blue. I agree with you, Commissioner O'Donnell, that somebody's probably is going to come in with a great idea, but it will be within the framework of what we kind of want. And I don't think the City Commission in the past has been very specific. And again, I have to point back to, again, I'm not blaming anybody, but, if we'd had more thought that McDonald's would not be in the middle of those 3 parcels, making the other 2 completely undevelopable. And I just think, I don't want to see that happen. I want somebody to come in and be somewhat serious, so maybe we say, yes, we're going to solicit offers, and parcel X, parcel Y, parcel Z, whatever we've got the parcels in our plan, here's some general specificity. And I think staff has already kind of heard what we might like to see. And if they want us to be, way more specific, we can. But I think you have a general idea of kind of what we're looking for. But it's not everything. I just don't want to see these, like I said, these WAG type proposals come forward. But I think we are ready. I think we are ready to look at that. So we are setting the table, but we're going to make it a little more formal rather than just providing the table and the tablecloth. We're saying, okay, here's the place setting. Go for it. There's so many people that I've talked to over the last year and a half since I was chair that says we'd really like to propose on this. And I said, we're not ready yet. So now we're ready. We're more ready. And we should do it. But I don't want it to be just really loosey-goosey. So that's all I wanted to say.
I guess I'm a little confused. Are you saying we are ready to discuss offers?
With a little more specificity.
So that's a no as of today?
No. We have adopted the plan. We just need a little more language to give somebody an idea of where they should go with what they're going to propose to us.
Okay, I got to think about that for a minute.
Yeah, think about it.
Commissioner Morrow.
Thank you. I think that we've spent so much time working on this, and I'm really glad that we finally approved it. I would prefer that we move forward. I agree, we don't just want things coming out of nowhere, and that's why we adopted a framework for decision-making. It isn't coming straight to us at the dais, it's going to the team that James will be leading, and so I'm comfortable knowing that they are...
Not leaving. He's not leaving. Please don't leave.
I said leading.
I thought that's what I said.
Yeah, it sounded like leaving.
So I feel comfortable knowing that it's going to be that team that's going to be taking the first run at it before anything comes to us. So I say we move forward.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
In many ways, I agree with Commissioner McGriff, especially when she cites McDonald's as an example. But I don't want the mistakes of the past to hinder the progress of the future. Now, I realize what we're talking about here is urban renewal-owned properties and city properties. But if I apply that same criteria, that we're not going to accept anything from anyone unless we put forth the specifications, I mean, look what Summit is proposing to do with the Rossman landfill. We wouldn't even entertain that if it were ours. I think we need to, the reason I want to keep it open is simply because you may get a great idea, and maybe it doesn't work for that location, but maybe we put that great idea in another location. And not having ever heard the idea, we don't avail ourselves of that opportunity. So I'd like to hear it, whether I do anything. And also those that come forward with those ideas, that's at their own risk. That's incentive. That's their private party desire to do something. So I'm open to anything that someone comes forward with. It may end up where they want it. It may end up not at all, or it may end up in a different location. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with what Commissioner Morrow said and Commissioner O'Donnell. We have put a good decision-making structure in that plan, and we need to entertain offers and see how they stack up against what we wrote in the plan. My opinion. Commissioner Neely, I think you might be next.
Well, basically, I'm going to basically agree. I know there have been more than one proposal coming out from the property on coming down on 10th Street, but I don't know if there's been that many. I think we've had unsolicited proposals on various places, but I don't think we've had a lot. And if we're going to start limiting the options, even if it's a broad limitation, we just may lose out on a project that might be ideal. And I would suggest that we're in a position to let people know that that property is available for development and look at what proposals they are. If it's a bad proposal, you're right, staff is going to take a look at that. And so I'm not so concerned about that. I think in the time you were referring to, I think it was a different time in terms of different city management and everything else. I don't think a thing like that would happen, like a McDonald's would happen again.
Commissioner McGriff.
Yeah, this is not for rebuttal, but I sent information to Mr. Graham, and I said, why haven't we had an opportunity? So I remember this development opportunity study we did in 2010, where we had a firm look at a couple of pieces of property that we owned, and I don't think any of you have looked at that. I've got it on, it's on my phone, but I mean, I can expand it, but anyway, it was done, I believe it was 10th and Main and 12th and Main. And even though it's a little out of date, it would be worth taking a look at again, just to see what was being proposed. We asked them to come in, and it wasn't a development company, it was a firm that was looking at it. So it was what we call a DOS, Development Opportunity Study, for those parcels. And then the second thing I want to say is that I believe some time ago, Commissioner Smith talked about a proposal that was presented to us, and you had some objections to some portions of it, and I tended to agree with you that that is not exactly what we thought we might want to see there. So again, it's probably going to be a little bit of a negotiation to say, hey, we don't think that this component is really what we need here. Again, the developer's going to say, yes, that's what we think you need, but again, I think we have an opportunity to weigh in. I'm not saying that we're going to delay anything. We can still have people talk to us, but I just don't want to, keep reinventing the wheel. So I agree. I said move forward. Let's move forward. Staff already knows kind of what some of our thoughts are, and I'm going to let them run with it, because if it's really dumb, they're going to say, sorry, that's dumb. That's not what the commission is really interested in, and they're going to tell them that. Maybe you won't use the word dumb, but
Commissioner Smith.
I always like it when I can make the city manager smile, so.
City manager, stand up for a while.
Mr. Conkle?
I think if we could maybe just have a little bit of a discussion. I think two things come to mind. One, is this more of a formal process trying to create energy? Like we put something out saying let's say it's the Stimson property that we're looking for developers to come in with ideas. I think we'd identified something, some general description in the urban renewal plan. We put that out and we say, please submit your proposals within 90 days or 60, whatever. We pick a number. Or is it truly just as they come in, trying to figure out how do you know what you have unless you say we want something, right, and advertise it, almost like we're selling a property. We're selling an option here, an idea, a vision to try to generate, instead of one coming in and a couple of weeks later another one comes in, some structure to at least maybe hopefully having options of things to look at and be able to compare them versus, one of the things I heard was we didn't want to sit back and just let offers come in and then we kind of work through them, right? More of a formalized process. And then the second part of that is every one of those properties included the potential for urban renewal funds to be part of the development. And until we know the results in May, if I'm a developer who says, okay, I'm looking at this property, I know I'm going to need some urban renewal funds, but we're not going to be able to answer that question until May. So, those are just kind of two things that I've been thinking about in terms of how do we move these projects forward. Is there work we do now, wait till the election, or do we say, please submit, and if you're asking for public financing through urban renewal, we're not going to know until mid-May.
Commissioner Smith.
I agree with most of everything that's been said, but it occurs to me another question is, do the signs go back up? Because we just tore them down. I don't know how many times we have put the signs up and removed them and put them up again and removed them and put them up again. They're down now. So do we put them back up?
Commissioner O'Donnell. Or is that Mr. Cross? Sorry. I can't tell.
Yeah, I guess mine really comes to, I don't think we're ready to do an RFP for any of the properties yet. We don't know exactly what we're doing with any of them yet. So I don't know if the formal RFP process is really that time yet, but the unsolicited proposals, sure. I don't see why we wouldn't want to do any of that, especially with some of those properties, since we're the property owners of those properties, we have a little bit more say than a private person just building there anyways with not using us at all. Is there something that we want to use as an example for it? Like, do we want to make a mixed use, the first mixed use downtown or something like that? Do we want to use one of our properties to do that? So I think we're not quite to the RFP because we might have other projects for the mixed use that goes back to the quiet zone. You need the quiet zone there to do the mixed use. Well, if we want to make sure mixed use gets down there and we want to be the first people, we want to make sure it happens. We have properties down there to start. We might want to wait for that. We might not want to jump before. We might get something better if we wait for one of our other projects to actually happen. That's my only point.
Commissioner Neely.
Last week, my wife and I went out and ate on Main Street for our 60th anniversary. And I couldn't really find any parking. I went illegally parked in some probably lawyer's office where I knew I wouldn't get told away because nobody would be there. The point is, obviously people are finding downtown Oregon City attractive at night. A lot of people are coming down there. And I think we should have offers for basically open proposals. But I think those offers should indicate the pluses of locating on Main Street, Oregon City. What are the amenities? What are the natural resources and everything that might attract somebody to invest down there?
Specificity, that's what I'm asking.
Well, it's not, we tell them what we've got,
Right, exactly.
and then I think we'll say, well, this is the kind of thing we want place we would want to have a business down there. And I don't think that's specificity only in the sense that we indicate what our amenities are.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So at the end of this wandering conversation, I think what staff would really like is what's our clear direction on what do you want us to do? So here's what I think. I'm not worried about solicited proposals. That's a vision that puts forward from us. We can have that framework if you want, but I still think unsolicited proposals should be entertained for the reasons I previously said, for that great idea that no one here envisioned. And so the other thing that could potentially happen is even in an urban renewal district, we need to give direction. If someone approaches our city staff and says, I want to build here, and I am not seeking UR funds, do they entertain that? Well, they certainly should. So if I were to make a motion, and maybe I will to move this along.
Yeah, please do.
I would like staff, I know we want to establish a framework, but my motion would be that we entertain unsolicited offers where staff does a cursory or initial review. If it has any merit whatsoever, we do a review here. We either dismiss it or we give them direction to move forward. Commissioner Smith?
I would add to that the question of whether or not it's solely urban renewal properties, because we've had unsolicited proposals for other of our properties in the past that I don't think we want to overlook either.
Agree. I would add city-owned and urban renewal properties to that specification.
Does everybody understand the motion?
Second.
Okay.
Commissioner Doug Neely. Aye. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sean Cross.
Yes.
And Chair Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Thank you. Staff, you got your direction, right?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Anything in communications?
No, sir.
Anything from any of the commissioners? All right, we're adjourned.